Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "Build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door." The idea is that you can take an old idea, even a good one, and improve upon it by making something better. That's a great idea, and the world is full of examples of this happening, which we can see in everything from computing to the evolution of pizza. But sometimes we settle on an idea and an innovation, and even when something new and better comes along, we stick with the old version. Why? Well, that's a good question. Number 10. The Richter scale has been out of favor for decades. If you go online on any given day after an earthquake has occurred, you can guarantee beyond a shadow of a doubt you'll see news media and social media postings about the power of that earthquake. They'll tell you if it was a weak earthquake or a strong one based on the Richter scale. Low numbers are not bad, high numbers are really bad. Most people have a basic understanding of this and what the Richter scale means. What fewer of us are aware of is that the Richter scale is outdated and has been for decades. The moment magnitude scale is the preferred method of measuring seismic activity, and it was first detailed all the way back in 1979 as the standard scale used by scientific bodies like the US Geological Survey. The Richter scale wasn't a bad scale, but it had issues. Most notably, it was a relative scale. The Richter scale measures earthquakes against other earthquakes. Moment magnitude is able to give an absolute measure by measuring all seismic waves and detailing fault slippage and friction, among other things. Another problem with the Richter scale is that its creator, Charles Richter, lived in California and was concerned with measuring California quakes. It was never intended to take into account conditions elsewhere in the world. It also wasn't meant to handle truly massive quakes. Moment magnitude is designed to measure any quake in any location under any conditions. It strips Richter's limitations and does a good job of it, but it hasn't yet achieved acceptance or awareness on even a basic level. Number 9. The Fujita scale for tornadoes has been replaced with the enhanced Fujita scale. Like earthquakes, tornadoes are explained to most people on a scale known as the F scale or Fujita scale. You can thank the 1996 film Twister for popularizing the concept. The idea is that as wind speeds increase, the Fujita number increases all the way to the legendary F5, a sort of tornadic bogeyman of ultimate power. These speeds were based on an understanding of the damage the tornado caused. And of course, media stories will let you know the F number of any tornado even today. The scale was developed in 1971 and had some notable limitations in how it explained tornadoes. The biggest issue was, how do you rank a tornado that causes no damage? If a tornado formed in the middle of nowhere and destroyed some fields, it could have literally been the most powerful tornado ever, but the Fujita scale has to rank it on the bottom because it didn't technically do anything. The scale also based damage on worst damage, so if one building is destroyed but 1,000 aren't, it's considered destructive for the damage it did cause. Plus, it was known to grossly overestimate wind speeds above F3. The enhanced Fujita scale has been stepping in to take up old school Fujita slack. Some media outlets use it, but it's often not adequately explained. Enhanced Fujita is a wind scale, not just a damage scale. It's able to look at damage across an area and recognize that if a wooden shack falls over but a brick house doesn't, then maybe it's not an F4 after all. Number 8. The 5 stages of grief is not based on any science. Even if you're unfamiliar with the name Kubler-Ross, you're probably aware of the grief scale to which it refers. Also called the 5 stages of grief, it purports to explain the 5 stages of emotion that humans go through when experiencing grief. The stages, in order, are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. It turns out that this model is not particularly science-based, however. It doesn't account for how many, or even most people, process grief, and it wasn't supposed to explain how the bereaved deal with loss either. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed the stages after studying terminally ill patients in the 1960s. So, the grief she was referencing was an individual's own in terms of realizing they were dying. It was not related to the grief you might experience over losing a loved one, a pet, experiencing a disaster, or anything else. And in fairness to Kubler-Ross, she wasn't presenting it as a universal understanding of all grief either. There's no evidence that most people experience anything like those 5 stages. In fact, there's no uniform way to express grief because it's a human emotion, and how could it follow established steps from one person to another? That would seem to indicate grief is something that is done to people uniformly from some outside source, which doesn't make sense. Number 7. Driving with hands at 10 and 2 is considered unsafe. Hands at 10 and 2 is a cliche you'll run across when learning how to drive, and a trope that will sometimes pop up in comedies now and then when someone is learning to drive. For many years, it was the standard rule for where to keep your hands on the wheel, likening the steering wheel to the face of a clock and indicating that you should align your hands with 10 and 2. They even make smart steering wheel covers that warn you if your hands leave that position. For some years now, 10 and 2 have been out of favor with driver's eds and organizations concerned with driver safety. AAA and others have been instructing drivers to hold the wheel at 9 and 3 for over a decade now. The National Highway Safety Administration says the same thing. Part of the reason for the switch has to do with airbag position. If your hands are at 10 and 2, you're in a prime position for the airbag to go off and launch your hands at your own face at 100 miles per hour. Number 6. The idea that you have 5 senses is very outdated. The idea that humans have 5 senses, sight, touch, hearing, smell, and taste, dates all the way back to ancient Greece, when Aristotle assured us that humans have 5 senses and no more. There's no wonder that the idea has changed some in the meantime. Even though most people still regard 5 as the real numbers, others have proposed that we have many more, even over a dozen. Google it and you'll find sites listing as many as 18. The New York Times ran an article back in 1964 dealing with the limitations of the 5-sense model and including things like a sense of balance, among others. Others mention senses like proprioception, which allows you to sense your body in space. Sense of time, weight, wetness, distance, even the need to urinate have all been mentioned as additional senses that Aristotle's simple 5 neglect to account for. Number 5. The idea of repressed memories is generally not accepted in psychology. Repressed memories have been fodder for a lot of dramatic films and talk shows, but the science behind them is dubious at best. While some clinicians still espouse their validity, those who study memory scientifically say that they don't exist. Repressed memories, as the term is understood, are either things we just forgot, memories that may have been implanted through suggestion, or things someone is consciously repressing. Repressed memories was at the forefront of the satanic panic of the 1980s and 90s, where people claimed to have been abused in satanic cults as children and repressed the memories. The FBI could find no evidence of this ever happening, and there is research indicating that a number of clinicians use suspect methods to uncover would-be repressed memories. Number 4. Blood quantum still determines Native American status. In the United States, one's ability to qualify for status in a Native American tribe depends on blood quantum. That's your percentage of native blood according to certain guidelines. Many tribes, like the Navajo, have set up their own requirements for this, and they're still in place today. That said, the original idea for blood quantum was basically a way for the government to decide who qualified for Native American status. The Department of the Interior will literally issue you a certified degree of Indian blood card for your wallet. It's a controversial issue to this day, but it's still in place. Part of the problems stem from how it was established in the first place. Your blood percentage is based on census data, but these were often filled out by non-natives. In some cases, they would look at a person and decide they didn't look native, so they were not included, even if they were 100% Native American. Likewise, they might still list someone as full blood with no evidence to support it. Number 3. The tongue map was debunked years ago. The tongue map is a concept that is over 100 years old, devised by German David Haneke. It proposed that different areas of the tongue are taste-specific. Sweet always tasted at the tip, salty at the front side, sour at the back sides, and bitter in the rear. The center was basically useless. This was so accepted, they not only taught it in school, they made kids conduct experiments to prove it, which was not fun for most students since it's not accurate and therefore not easy to experimentally prove. In 1974, Virginia Collins showed that Haneke's map was not accurate. We now understand that taste receptors are far more complicated than a simple region-by-region map, not to mention the fact that umami is a recognized fifth taste not even accounted for in the old map. Despite that, it's still widely known and shared online. Number 2. The Scoville scale is based on very arbitrary and subjective science. A few years ago, the world became obsessed with heat. Hot peppers, hot sauces, and even spicy Cheetos became a pop culture phenomenon. The popularity of Hot Ones, the talk show in which guests eat hot wings, shows it's still going strong, and the Scoville heat unit has been our only way of understanding how hot these things are, despite the fact that it's very unscientific and subjective. Pharmacist Wilbur Scoville developed his scale way back in 1912. The way it works is kind of baffling. You need to dry out a pepper and then dissolve it in alcohol. Then you dilute that pepper and mix it with sugar water until 3 of 5 humans, whoever they may be, can't feel the heat anymore. If 1 unit of sugar water diluted 1 unit of pepper mix, then the Scoville would be 1. If it's 10,000 units of sugar water, whether that's drops or mils or whatever, to 1 unit of pepper, then it's 10,000 Scoville. That's how they get the ratings, and you can see the flaw. Who are those 5 people? Have they all been tasting peppers all day? Do they literally taste the same mix over and over until they can't sense heat? If so, how do we know their tongue just didn't go numb? Chromatography and electrochemical testing is used to get a much more accurate accounting of pepper heat these days, and they still assign a Scoville number, even if the testing method is not the same. Number 1. The US still uses imperial measures despite converting to metric nearly 50 years ago. Every so often, you'll run across someone online making fun of the metric system. America is one of 3 holdouts in the entire world that have avoided widespread acceptance of metric. The other 2 are Liberia. and Myanmar. However, metric actually is the accepted, adopted, and legal system of measurement in the United States, at least for trade and commerce, and has been since 1975. Just don't tell anybody. The Metric Conversion Act of 1975, which was amended in 1988, 1996, and 2004, established the metric system as the preferred system of weights and measures. In fact, metric has been authorized for use since 1866. Despite this, nearly every measurement in the US is still conducted using imperial measurements like miles and pounds.